Hello and welcome to another edition of Only in Illinois. This week we could call it the Shutdown Showdown. I'm Madeline Dubeck here with Matt Dietrich, and it's been quite a week.
Yes, it has, and it started in a very strange way. We had Governor Bruce Rauner suddenly coming out and saying that no matter how long any government shutdown goes, if we enter July without a budget, he'll be able to pay state employees.
So instead of trying to push this into a crisis, they were actually taking some of the pressure off, and both Rauner and Madigan want to make it appear that they are trying to keep things operating as usual.
Right, and you have also Speaker Madigan now has become just about the most visible person in Springfield. All of a sudden he's holding press conferences every week, and he's very, cheerful and upbeat, and wants to come off like he's the reasonable one. Moderation is his word, and you can't be extreme. And he says Governor Rauner is being extreme. Meanwhile, Governor Rauner wants to portray himself as the protector of the vulnerable and the protector of state employees who are still showing up for work, even though we now do not have a budget.
So, and the one who's tried to compromise and offered multiple deals, including trying to help the city of Chicago.
Right.
So some specific things that have happened just in the last few hours, depending on when you're watching this, of course. There was an attempt to pass a 1-month budget.
Right.
And what happened there?
And that failed because
that was a Democratic
Right. It failed
effort
in the House because it had to pass by a 3/5 majority, and in order to do that, it needed 71 votes. There are exactly 71 Democrats in the House, but there were only 67 who voted for the 1-month temporary budget.
But it did pass the Senate. And there also was CPS, Chicago Public Schools, huge concern for all of the state, really, as it should be. They actually made a almost $700 million pension payment that was due yesterday, but then the mayor and the head of the school board came out today and said that they'll have to look at a $200 million property tax increase and some pretty severe cuts.
Lots of layoffs for Chicago Public Schools.
Lots of layoffs that the teachers union was absolutely
right. There was a lot of concern.
About.
Originally, there was a lot of concern that if they made this required pension payment, which was due on June 30th, that they would spend all their reserves and not be able to open the schools on time.
Right. So he's saying they can open the schools and class sizes will be the same, but there's some pretty severe cuts they're talking about.
Getting back to the state and the state budget situation, which it's been called a shutdown for about a month now. And no one really seems to know what does this shutdown mean because July 1st arrived and government is still functioning. Employees are still showing up. Governor Rauner reached an agreement with AFSCME Council 31, the largest state employee union, that would keep them going to their jobs even though their contract expired. So the big mystery now is, okay, if it's a shutdown, what does that mean? And at this point, we're still kind of waiting to see. It's very early, and these things have happened before, and state government can get by for a few weeks in the interim period. The problem is we don't know what happens if it goes beyond a couple of weeks.
Lastly, the kind of last little move that occurred in the waning hours of the week before the holiday was an amendatory veto by the governor that kind of boxes everyone in the political posturing role.
Right, and this is probably the most interesting thing from a political standpoint that's happened all week. A year ago, the General Assembly passed a bill that ensured that their paychecks would continue flowing from year to year regardless of the budget situation, and built into that bill was a cost of living increase. And Governor Rauner this week did an amendatory veto on the budget implementation for that bill, which took out the raises for the lawmakers, and he released a veto message that said, at a time when everybody else is making sacrifice, this is the worst timing possible. Well, this is very reminiscent of what happened a couple of years ago in Illinois when the previous
different governor.
Right. This is when Pat Quinn, you might remember 2 years ago, he was upset with the General Assembly for not sending him a pension reform bill, so he canceled their paychecks entirely. When that happened, Speaker Madigan and Senate President Cullerton went to court. They were the plaintiffs, and they sued, and pretty much everybody knew that they were going to prevail because Illinois law is pretty clear that the governor can't just go in and mess around with lawmaker pay in a punitive way. Now, the big question this time around is, who's going to be a plaintiff right now when you've got thousands of state employees not knowing where their paychecks are coming from? You've got people whose children who depend on subsidized daycare so they can keep their jobs, and they're wondering, is my daycare center going to be able to stay open? You've got social service agencies, developmentally disabled centers wondering where their funding is going to come from. So I'm wondering, are Madigan and Cullerton going to step forward and be plaintiffs again and say, hey, the law says you got to give us our raises? That's going to be a tough one.
That will be a tough one. So we'll be watching. You stay tuned and have a great holiday.